James Thompson adjusted his casual polo shirt and jeans as he stood outside the impressive glass building of Hartwell and Associates. The morning sun made the windows sparkle like diamonds. James had built his technology company from absolutely nothing, starting in a tiny flat in Manchester after growing up in foster care. Now, his company was worth millions of pounds, but he never forgot where he came from. Today was important. His company was thinking about a £50 million business deal with Hartwell and Associates. But James had a special way of doing business. He always visited companies dressed like an ordinary person first. He wanted to see how they really treated people when they thought nobody important was watching. This had taught him more about companies than any fancy meeting ever could. The marble lobby was beautiful and expensive looking. Everything was polished and perfect. James walked across the smooth floor, his footsteps echoing softly. He had learned something important during his difficult childhood. You can tell everything about a person by how they treat someone they think is unimportant. At the reception desk sat a young woman named Emma Wilson. She was probably in her 20s, with perfectly styled hair and expensive clothes. She was completely focused on her mobile phone, scrolling through something that seemed much more interesting than her job. She did not even look up when James approached. James smiled warmly and spoke in his gentle northern accent. "Good morning. I'm here to discuss the partnership proposal with Thompson Technology Solutions." Emma finally looked up, but her expression immediately showed annoyance. Her eyes quickly scanned James from head to toe, taking in his simple clothes and casual appearance. In that instant, she made a judgment about who he was and what he was worth. Her voice became sharp and unfriendly. "We don't hire cleaners here. The service entrance is round the back," she said, waving her hand like she was shooing away a fly. James felt a familiar pain in his chest. It was the same feeling he had experienced many times as a child in foster care, when people looked at his old clothes and decided he was not worth their time. But he had learned to stay calm in these situations. He kept his voice gentle and polite. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm here for a business meeting about our partnership proposal." Emma's face became even harder and more unfriendly. Her voice rose louder, and other people in the lobby began to notice what was happening. "Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but you need to get lost before I call security. People like you don't belong in this building." The words hit James like a physical blow. "People like you." He had heard those words too many times in his life. As a child with no parents, as a teenager with no money, as a young man trying to start his business. But now he was successful, and he had the power to respond differently. Around the lobby, other employees were watching the scene unfold. Some looked uncomfortable, but none of them stepped forward to help. James noticed a young man in an expensive suit standing nearby. The man was named Tom Andrews, and something about James seemed familiar to him, but he could not quite remember where he had seen him before. Tom felt like he should say something, but he was afraid of getting involved. James remained completely calm. His voice stayed soft and respectful. "May I have your name, please?" Emma was now becoming angry. "It's Emma, and I'm calling security right now," she snapped, reaching for her phone with shaking hands. James could see the security guards walking toward them across the marble floor. He knew he would be asked to leave in a few moments, but he also knew something that Emma did not know. This moment would change everything for both of them. He looked directly into Emma's eyes and spoke very softly, but his words carried a weight that made her pause for just a moment. "I hope you remember this moment, Emma. Sometimes the person you turn away might be the one who could change your life." As the security guards approached, James maintained his dignity. He did not argue or raise his voice. He simply stood there, a successful businessman being treated like he was nobody, all because of how he was dressed and what Emma thought about people who looked like him. The security guards politely but firmly escorted James toward the exit. As he walked away, he was already planning what would happen next. This was not the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Emma had no idea that her treatment of this quiet, polite man would soon change everything for her company, her colleagues, and herself. James Thompson sat in his beautiful office high above the River Thames, looking out at the busy London skyline. Through the tall windows, the city stretched out before him, full of people going about their daily lives. But his mind was still back in that marble lobby where he had been treated so poorly. His leather chair was comfortable, but he felt restless and troubled. Margaret Foster, his trusted assistant, knocked softly on the heavy wooden door. She had worked with James for 5 years and could read his moods better than anyone. When she entered the office, she immediately noticed the serious expression on his face. "Mr. Thompson, how did the visit to Hartwell and Associates go?" she asked carefully, sitting down in the chair across from his desk. James turned away from the window and looked at Margaret. She could see something in his eyes that she had rarely seen before, a mixture of deep hurt and strong determination. Margaret had heard stories about James's difficult childhood, and she recognized this look. It was the same expression he had when someone had treated him unfairly because of his background. "Margaret, I need you to do something very important for me," James said quietly. "I need you to conduct a complete investigation into Hartwell and Associates. Look into everything: their company culture, their employment practices, any discrimination, complaints, and their recent business performance. I want to know everything about this company." Margaret had learned over the years that when James used this particular tone of voice, something significant had happened. She knew better than to ask too many questions right away. Instead, she simply nodded and said, "I'll get started immediately, sir." Margaret was excellent at her job. She had contacts throughout the business world and knew how to find information quickly and quietly. She spent the rest of the day making phone calls, searching through business records, and speaking with people who had worked with Hartwell and Associates. By evening, she had put together a thick folder of documents that told a very disturbing story. The next morning, Margaret returned to James's office with her findings. She sat down and opened the folder with a serious expression on her face. "Sir, what I found is quite troubling," she began. "Hardwell and Associates currently has 3 active discrimination lawsuits against them. Former employees are claiming they were treated unfairly because of their race, gender, or background." James listened carefully, his jaw tightening as Margaret continued, "They've lost several talented employees in the past year. When these people left, they described the workplace as having a hostile environment. Many said they felt unwelcome and disrespected." Margaret explained, turning the pages of her report. "What about their financial situation?" James asked. "That's even worse, sir. Their financial records show they're struggling badly. They've lost 4 major contracts in the past 6 months alone. The clients who cancelled their contracts specifically mentioned unprofessional behavior and poor company culture as their reasons for leaving." James stood up and walked to his window again, processing this information. Margaret continued reading from her notes. "Sir, I also looked into the specific employee who you encountered yesterday. Emma Wilson has been with the company for 2 years. In that time, 5 formal complaints have been filed against her for similar incidents, treating visitors and potential clients rudely, making assumptions about people based on their appearance. And what did the company do about these complaints?" James asked. though he suspected he already knew the answer. Nothing. So, each time, management either covered it up or simply ignored it entirely. They never disciplined her or provided any training to help her improve her behavior. James felt a familiar anger rising in his chest, but he controlled it. This was not just about him anymore. This was about a pattern of behavior that was hurting many people. There's one more thing, sir, Margaret said quietly. Based on their financial situation and the contracts they've lost, Hardwell and Associates desperately needs your partnership to survive. Without it, they'll likely have to close their doors within the next few months. James closed the folder and walked back to his window, looking out at the city below. Growing up in foster care had taught him many lessons. One was that everyone deserved a chance to succeed, regardless of their background. But another lesson was equally important. Actions have consequences. He thought about all the young people who might walk into that building and face the same treatment Emma had shown him, Margaret. He said, turning back to face her schedule, a formal meeting with their senior management for tomorrow morning. I want their full executive team present. Margaret nodded and made a note in her diary as she was about to leave. James called her name again, and Margaret. He said with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes, "This time, I'll dress appropriately for the occasion." Margaret understood exactly what he meant. Tomorrow would be very different from yesterday. The next morning, James Thompson walked through the same glass doors of Hartwell and Associates. But everything about him was different. He wore his most expensive tailored suit, perfectly pressed and fitted. His shoes were polished to a shine, and his tie was perfectly knotted. Behind him walked his full executive team, 5 successful business people, equally impressive clothing. They moved through the marble lobby like they owned the place. Emma Wilson was sitting at a reception desk, just as she had been yesterday. She was looking at her phone again, probably scrolling through the same websites that had distracted her before, when she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up with the same bored expression she always wore, but then her face changed completely. The color drained from her cheeks, and her mouth fell open in shock. Her hands began to shake as she recognized the man she had treated so badly just 24 hours earlier. The same man who had asked politely about a business meeting. The same man she had told to get lost and threatened to have arrested. Emma's mind raced as she tried to understand what was happening. This could not be the same person. Yesterday, he had been wearing old jeans and a simple shirt. Today, he looked like he owned a company worth millions. But his face was unmistakable. It was definitely the same man. She frantically reached for her phone, trying to call upstairs to warn someone, anyone, about what was happening. But her fingers were shaking so badly she could barely dial the number. Before she could complete the call, James walked directly up to her desk. "Good morning, Emma," James said calmly. His voice was exactly the same as yesterday, polite, gentle and respectful. But now there was something else in it, a quiet authority. That made Emma's heart race with fear. "I believe Mr. Hartwell is expecting us." Emma could not speak. She just stared at him with wide, frightened eyes. James smiled slightly and continued walking toward the elevators with his team. Emma watched them go, knowing that her world was about to change forever. On the 20th floor, the boardroom was filled with the senior management team of Hartwell and Associates. Richard Hartwell, the company's founder and CEO, sat at the head of a long, polished oak table. Round him sat his most important executives, people who had worked with him for years to build the company. They were all dressed in their best suits, ready to impress the important visitors from Thompson Technology Solutions. This meeting could save their struggling company. They had prepared presentations and practiced their speeches. Everyone was nervous but hopeful when the boardroom door opened and James walked in. Several of the executives immediately recognized him. They had seen his picture in business magazines and newspapers. Some had even met him at industry conferences. Richard Hartwell looked confused at first. Then his face began to show understanding and horror as he realized what must have happened. "Gentlemen," James said calmly, placing a thick folder on the polished table. "I'm James Thompson, CEO of Thompson Technology Solutions." The room became completely silent. Everyone stared at James, trying to process what they were seeing. This was supposed to be their first meeting with him, but clearly something had gone wrong. "Mr. Thompson," Richard stammered, his voice shaking slightly. "There must be some mistake. We've been looking forward to discussing our partnership. We have presentations prepared." And James raised his hand gently, and Richard stopped speaking. Immediately, the gesture was polite but carried such authority that no one dared to interrupt. "Before we discuss any business," James said, "I need to share something with you about your company culture." He opened his folder and began pulling out documents. "Yesterday, I came to your building to see the real Hartwell and Associates. I wanted to understand what kind of company you really are." The executives looked at each other nervously. None of them knew what James was talking about. "Your receptionist, Emma Wilson, told me to get lost and threatened to have me arrested," James continued, his voice remaining steady and calm. "She said people like me don't belong in your building." Several executives gasped. Tom Andrews, the young man who had witnessed the scene in the lobby, looked down at his hands in shame. He remembered seeing James yesterday and doing nothing to help. "The way your employees treat people when they think no one important is watching reveals your true company culture," James continued. "It tells me everything I need to know about who you really are." The room was filled with uncomfortable silence. Everyone knew that their £50 million partnership was slipping away, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Richard Hartwell felt his world crumbling round him as he sat in his expensive leather chair. His hands were shaking so badly he had to clasp them together to hide his nervousness. The most important business meeting of his company's life was turning into a disaster. And he knew it was all because of Emma's terrible behavior. "Mr. Thompson, I am deeply, deeply sorry," Richard said, his voice cracking with desperation. "What happened yesterday is not representative of our company values at all. Emma will be terminated immediately. Today. Right now. Please, I'm begging you, give us another chance. We can fix this." James listened to Richard's words without showing any emotion on his face. He stood up slowly from his chair and walked to the large window that overlooked the busy street. Below, 20 floors down, people were walking to work, living their normal lives, completely unaware of the drama happening in this boardroom. "Mr. Hartwell," James said quietly, still looking out the window, "this isn't just about Emma. This is about a culture that allowed this behavior to continue for years. According to my investigation, you have 3 active discrimination lawsuits against your company right now. Emma has had 5 formal complaints filed against her for a similar incident. And nothing changed." The room felt heavy with tension. Every executive round the table knew that their jobs were hanging by a thread. They had families to support, mortgages to pay, and dreams they were working toward. But they also knew that James was right. They had failed to create a respectful workplace. Tom Andrews, the young man who had witnessed Emma's treatment of James in the lobby, had been sitting quietly with his head down. But suddenly, he found the courage to speak up. His voice was shaky, but he forced himself to talk. "Mr. Thompson," Tom said, looking up with tears in his eyes. "I was there yesterday. I saw what happened to you, and I am deeply ashamed that I didn't speak up. I recognized you from business magazines, but I was afraid to get involved. I was a coward, and I'm sorry." James turned back from the window and looked at Tom. For the first time since entering the room, his expression softened slightly. He could see genuine remorse in the young man's eyes. "Tom, isn't it?" James said gently. "At least you're being honest now. That's more than I can say for your company's leadership over the past years." Richard Hartwell slumped deeper into his chair, looking defeated. He was a man who had built his company from nothing, just like James had. But somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of what was truly important. "Without your partnership, we'll have to close our doors," Richard said quietly. 50 people will lose their jobs. Many of them are good people who have worked hard for this company. They don't deserve to suffer because of Emma's actions." James walked back to the table and sat down. "I know," he replied calmly. "I've reviewed your financial records very carefully. Your company is struggling badly, but I can't reward a company that treats people with such disrespect. However, I do have a different proposal." All the executives leaned forward in their chairs, grasping at any hope that remained. This was their last chance to save their careers and their company. "I'm prepared to acquire your company's assets," James continued, "and offer employment to every person who demonstrates genuine commitment to change and respect. For all people, regardless of their appearance, background, or social status. This would include proper diversity training, new policies, and a complete cultural transformation." The room was silent as everyone processed what James was saying. He was offering them a lifeline, but with conditions those who can't embrace. "These changes will need to find opportunities elsewhere," James said firmly. "But those who can will be part of something better. A company that truly values every person who walks through its doors." Richard Hartwell nodded slowly, understanding that this was probably the best offer he was going to get. "What about Emma?" he asked quietly. James's expression became serious again. "Emma will be terminated today," he said firmly. "But this isn't about revenge. This is about creating a workplace where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. Change starts with consequences, but it continues with education and opportunity." Tom Andrews raised his hand slightly. "Mr. Thompson, if you give us this chance, I promise I'll do everything I can to help create the kind of company culture you're talking about. I won't stand by and watch discrimination happen again." James looked at Tom and nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of attitude that can make this transformation successful, Tom. It takes courage to admit when we've made mistakes and even more courage to work toward positive change." The meeting continued for another hour as James outlined his vision for the new company. It would be a place where everyone was valued, regardless of how they looked or where they came from. 6 months had passed since the terrible day in the marble lobby, and James Thompson stood in the exact same spot where Emma Wilson had once told him to get lost. But everything round him had changed completely. The building still looked the same with its shiny marble floors and tall windows, but the feeling in the air was totally different. It felt warm and welcoming now, like a place where anyone could belong. The reception desk where Emma used to sit was now occupied by Tom Andrews, the young man who had witnessed James's humiliation but had been too afraid to speak up. Tom had worked incredibly hard over the past 6 months to prove that he deserved a second chance. He was now the director of inclusive operations, a completely new position that James had created. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," Tom said with a genuine smile as James approached the desk. "The monthly diversity meeting is ready to begin in the conference room." James smiled back. remembering how Tom had found the courage to speak up during that difficult boardroom meeting 6 months ago. That moment of honesty had changed Tom's entire life. "How are our new policies working?" Tom. "Brilliantly, sir," Tom replied enthusiastically. "We've had zero discrimination complaints since we implemented the new training program. Employee satisfaction is at an all-time high, and we've increased our client base by 40%. It turns out that people really do want to work with companies that treat everyone with respect." James nodded with satisfaction. He had always believed that treating people well was not just the right thing to do, but also good for business. The company was now called Thompson Associates, and it was becoming known throughout London as a place where everyone was valued. In the conference room on the 20th floor, James stood before the team that had survived the transformation. Many of these were the same people who had worked there during Emma's time, but they had embraced the new culture of respect and inclusion. Some had struggled at first, but with proper training and support, they had learned to see the value in treating everyone with dignity. "When I first walked into this building 6 months ago, I was judged by my appearance and background," James began, his voice carrying across the room. "Today, I want to share with you why the difficult experience led to something positive for all of us." He gestured to a young woman sitting in the front row. She was dressed professionally and had a confident smile on her face. "Katie here is our new head of client relations. She grew up in social housing, just like I did. 6 months ago, she might have been treated the same way Emma treated me. Today, she's leading our most successful department." The room erupted in applause as Katie stood up, her eyes bright with pride and possibility. She had joined the company just 3 months ago, but her talent and dedication had quickly made her one of their most valuable employees. "The lesson isn't about revenge," James continued, his voice becoming more emotional. "It's about creating opportunities for everyone to succeed. When we treat people with dignity, regardless of how they look or where they come from, we create something beautiful." After the meeting ended, James walked through the lobby toward the exit. The same marble floors reflected his footsteps, but now they sounded different, confident and purposeful. He pushed through the glass doors and walked to his car, where a young man was waiting for him. Michael was 17 years old and came from one of the toughest neighborhoods in London. James had started a mentorship program for teenagers from difficult backgrounds, remembering his own struggles as a young person with no family support every week. He met with Michael to help him develop his business ideas. "Ready for our meeting?" "Michael?" James asked as he unlocked his car. "Yes, sir," the teenager replied, his voice filled with excitement. "I still can't believe you want to help me start my own business. Nobody has ever believed in me like this before." James smiled, remembering another young man who had once needed someone to believe in him. "Everyone deserves an opportunity, Michael. Sometimes we just need someone to believe in us and show us what's possible." As they drove through the busy London streets, James reflected on how one moment of discrimination had led to transformation for dozens of people. The company was thriving, employees were happy, and young people like Michael were getting chances they never would have had before. Even Emma Wilson had found a new path. She was now working at a small firm where she was required to take diversity training. Slowly, she was beginning to understand the impact of her actions and how her behavior had hurt not just James, but many other people over the years. The story had come full circle, proving that sometimes the most painful experiences can lead to the most beautiful transformations.